chosen one, this is your confirmation. Do not leave this season yet. What God is preparing for you is far closer than you think. There is a curious tendency in human nature that appears again and again throughout our lives. Whenever we encounter frustration, disappointment, uncertainty, or delay, our first instinct is often to look for a different place. We imagine that if we could simply change our surroundings, find a new opportunity, meet different people, or begin a new chapter somewhere else, the uneasiness within us would disappear. We assume that the problem is the location rather than the lesson, the environment rather than the condition of our hearts. Yet one of the most difficult truths to accept is that God often does some of his greatest work in the very place we are most eager to leave. This is not because God enjoys seeing us struggle. It is because he sees something we do not. We see the discomfort of the present moment. He sees the person we are becoming through it. We focus on escape. He focuses on transformation. The modern world encourages movement. If something feels difficult, move on. If progress seems slow, try something else. If a season becomes uncomfortable, abandon it and search for a new one. While there are certainly times when change is necessary, and even commanded by God, there is a danger in assuming that every feeling of dissatisfaction is a sign that we should leave. Sometimes the urge to move comes not from wisdom, but from impatience. Consider how often people stand at the edge of a breakthrough without realizing it. A farmer who digs up a seed every few days to check its progress will never see a harvest. The seed requires time beneath the surface. It develops in darkness before it emerges into light. To the impatient observer, nothing appears to be happening. Yet beneath the soil, invisible processes are unfolding with remarkable precision. The same principle often applies to the spiritual life. Many of us want visible evidence before we are willing to trust. We want certainty before commitment. We want proof before perseverance. But faith has always required something different. Faith asks us to believe that meaningful work can be taking place even when we cannot immediately see the results. Scripture repeatedly reveals this pattern. God frequently places people in seasons they would never have chosen for themselves. These seasons are rarely comfortable. They involve waiting, uncertainty, and questions that remain unanswered for longer than expected. Yet when we look back, we often discover that the period we wanted to escape was the very period that prepared us for everything that followed. There is also a psychological reality worth considering. Human beings often mistake familiarity with failure. When we remain in the same place for a long time, we begin to overlook the subtle growth taking place within us. We focus on what has not changed rather than what has. We measure our progress by external circumstances while ignoring the deeper work occurring in our character, our patience, our wisdom, and our trust in God. But God's priorities are not always identical to ours. We frequently ask, when will my situation change? God often asks, what is this situation producing within you? That question can be uncomfortable because it shifts the focus away from circumstances and toward transformation. It reminds us that God's primary concern is not merely where we are, but who we are becoming. Perhaps that is why some of life's greatest blessings arrive disguised as ordinary seasons. They do not announce themselves with dramatic signs. They emerge quietly through daily faithfulness, consistent trust, and the willingness to remain where God has planted us until he makes his direction unmistakably clear. The temptation to leave prematurely is often strongest when the purpose of the season is closest to being revealed. We grow weary just before the breakthrough. We become restless just before the lesson becomes clear. We start looking for an exit just as God is preparing an entrance into something greater. That is why wisdom requires patience, not passive resignation, but active trust. The kind of trust that continues to believe God is working, even when evidence seems scarce. The kind of trust that refuses to abandon the process simply because the outcome has not yet appeared. Before you decide that nothing good can come from your current season, consider the possibility that God is doing his deepest work there. The place you are tempted to leave may be the very ground where your future blessing is taking a root. And sometimes the greatest act of faith is not taking the next step forward. It is having the courage to stay where God has placed you until he says otherwise. If we are honest, one of the most difficult challenges in life is not suffering itself. It is waiting. Most people can endure hardship when they can see a clear finish line. What drains the human spirit is uncertainty. It is waking up day after day, praying the same prayers, carrying the same burdens, and wondering whether anything is changing at all. This is why waiting often feels so frustrating. It appears unproductive. It feels like a pause in the story, a delay in progress, an interruption of the life we hoped to be living. Yet what if our understanding of waiting is fundamentally incomplete? What if the seasons we call delays are actually some of the most important chapters in God's plan? The modern world teaches us to value speed above almost everything else. We want immediate answers, instant results, and quick solutions. We have become accustomed to pressing a button and receiving what we want within moments. Over time, this habit shapes not only our expectations of the world, but also our expectations of God. When his answers do not arrive on our schedule, we begin to assume that nothing is happening. But God's work rarely follows the rhythm of human impatience. A child may believe a tree appears suddenly because he notices it only when it rises above the ground. Yet the reality is that years of invisible growth occurred before that moment. Roots spread beneath the surface, long before branches reached toward the sky. The most important development happened where no one could see it. The same principle applies to spiritual growth. Much of God's work takes place beyond our immediate awareness. We notice external changes because they are visible, but God often begins with internal transformation. Before he changes circumstances, he frequently changes perspective. Before he opens doors, he prepares character. Before he releases blessings, he develops the capacity to handle them wisely. This can be difficult to appreciate while we are in the middle of the process. Human beings naturally focus on outcomes. We measure success by arrival rather than preparation. We celebrate victories while overlooking the long periods of discipline, patience, and perseverance that made those victories possible. Yet preparation is never wasted. Consider how often people look back on difficult seasons and realize they learned lessons that could not have been acquired any other way. The season that felt slow taught them patience. The season that felt lonely taught them dependence on God. The season that felt uncertain strengthened their faith. At the time, none of these developments seemed significant, but later they became the foundation upon which greater blessings were built. There is a profound difference between waiting and being abandoned. Waiting implies that something is still unfolding. It suggests movement toward a purpose, even if that movement is hidden from view. Too often, however, we interpret silence as absence. We assume that because God is not speaking in the way we expect, he must not be working. But silence is not inactivity. A teacher is often silent during an examination, not because he has disappeared, but because the lesson is being tested. Likewise, there are moments when God appears quiet, not because he has forgotten us, but because he is allowing faith to mature. He is teaching us to trust his character when we cannot trace his actions. This is where genuine faith becomes distinct from mere optimism. Optimism believes things will work out because circumstances seem favorable. Faith believes God is faithful, even when circumstances seem confusing. It rests not on visible evidence, but on confidence in the one who holds the future. The waiting season, therefore, becomes more than a period of delay. It becomes an opportunity to develop trust. It reveals whether our confidence is rooted in God's promises or merely in our preferred timetable. It exposes our tendency to seek control and invites us to surrender it. And perhaps that is one of the greatest lessons waiting can teach. We discover that God's timing is not simply different from ours, it is often wiser than ours. He sees consequences we cannot see, opportunities we cannot anticipate, and connections we cannot understand. What appears to us as a delay may actually be protection. What feels like a closed door may be preparation for a better one. Years later, many people realize they are grateful for prayers that were not answered immediately. Had God granted every request the moment it was made, they might have received blessings before they were ready to steward them. They might have entered opportunities without the wisdom necessary to sustain them. Waiting, then, is not wasted time. It is time invested in becoming the person God intends us to be. Every day of trust, every moment of perseverance, and every act of faith contributes to a work that is larger than we can presently comprehend. So if you find yourself in a season where progress seems slow and answers seem distant, do not assume that nothing is happening. The God who works through eternity is not constrained by the urgency of the moment. Even now, He may be accomplishing more than you can possibly see, because what feels like a delay today may one day be revealed as the very preparation that made your blessing possible. One of the greatest misconceptions we carry through life is the belief that if we cannot see something happening, then nothing is happening at all. We are creatures of sight. We trust what is visible, measurable, and immediate. We look for evidence that can be observed, and progress that can be quantified. Yet much of reality does not operate according to those terms. Some of the most powerful forces in existence are invisible. We cannot see gravity, yet it holds entire worlds in place. We cannot see the wind itself, yet we witness its effects everywhere. And in much the same way, we cannot always see God's activity, even while it is shaping our lives in ways we do not yet understand. This is why so many people become discouraged too soon. They evaluate their situation solely by what is visible in the present moment. They look at unanswered prayers, unchanged circumstances, and unrealized dreams, then conclude that God must be inactive. But appearances can be profoundly misleading. What seems empty may actually be full of unseen preparation. What seems delayed may actually be developing beneath the surface. Nature offers a remarkable illustration of this truth. When a seed is planted in the ground, there is often a long period during which absolutely nothing appears to happen. Day after day, the soil looks exactly the same. To an impatient observer, it would seem reasonable to assume the seed has failed. Yet beneath the surface, a hidden process is underway. The seed is breaking open. Roots are extending downward. Life is forming where no human eye can observe it. The most important part of the process happens before anything becomes visible. That reality challenges one of our deepest instincts. We want immediate confirmation. We want visible signs that our efforts are producing results. We want reassurance that our faith is justified. But God often invites us to trust the process before He reveals the outcome. He asks us to believe that growth is occurring, even when the evidence remains hidden. This is not because God enjoys mystery for its own sake. It is because faith develops in the space between promise and fulfillment. If every answer arrived instantly, trust would hardly be necessary. If every blessing appeared the moment we requested it, perseverance would never be formed. The hidden seasons serve a purpose. They teach us to anchor our confidence in God's character rather than in changing circumstances. Many people assume their breakthrough begins when they finally see results. In reality, the breakthrough often begins long before they recognize it. It begins in conversations they have not yet heard, opportunities they have not yet encountered, and circumstances God is already arranging behind the scenes. What appears sudden from our perspective is frequently the result of countless unseen developments that have been unfolding for months, years, or even decades. This is one reason hindsight so often changes our understanding of life. Looking backward, we can trace connections that were invisible while we were living through them. We see how one disappointment redirected us toward a greater opportunity. We see how one closed door protected us from future regret. We see how a season that felt stagnant was actually preparing us for responsibilities we could not yet imagine. At the time, however, none of it seemed obvious. That is where patience becomes essential. Patience is not merely the ability to endure delay, it is the wisdom to recognize that visible progress is not the only kind of progress. It is the understanding that God's work often begins in hidden places before it appears in public view. There is also a deeper spiritual principle at work here. God is often more concerned with the foundation than the structure. Human beings tend to admire what can be seen, the achievements, the success, the answered prayers, the visible blessings. But God frequently focuses on what lies beneath. A building is only as strong as its foundation. The higher it is meant to rise, the deeper that foundation must be established. Likewise, the blessings God intends to sustain often require preparation that remains invisible for a season. Perhaps this explains why some of the most transformative moments in life seem ordinary while they are happening. We imagine that God works only through dramatic events, yet he often works through quiet faithfulness, through daily obedience, through prayers that seem repetitive, through small decisions that appear insignificant at the time. These hidden acts become the roots that support future growth. So when you are tempted to believe that nothing is changing, remember that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. The fact that you cannot yet see movement does not mean God has stopped working. The seed does not cease growing simply because it remains underground. In fact, the very season that feels silent may be the season in which the most important work is taking place. Beneath the surface of your circumstances, beyond the reach of your understanding, God may already be preparing the answer you have been waiting for. And when the time is right, what has been growing in secret will emerge in the open, and you will discover that God was working all along. There is an interesting pattern that appears throughout human experience. Just before a person reaches a meaningful goal, just before a breakthrough occurs, or just before a long-awaited answer arrives, the temptation to quit often becomes stronger than ever. It seems almost paradoxical. One might assume that as we move closer to success, confidence would naturally increase. Yet many people discover the opposite. The final stretch is frequently the hardest. This reality is not limited to spiritual life. Athletes experience it near the end of a race. Entrepreneurs encounter it before a business begins to gain traction. Students feel it before completing years of study. The closer they come to the finish line, the more intense the exhaustion can become. The mind begins searching for reasons to stop. Doubt grows louder. Frustration becomes more persuasive. The same phenomenon often occurs in matters of faith. When prayers remain unanswered for a long time, discouragement starts to whisper dangerous conclusions. It suggests that nothing will ever change. It insists that continued effort is pointless. It interprets temporary difficulty as permanent defeat. Over time, these thoughts can feel surprisingly convincing, especially when circumstances appear to support them. Yet one of the greatest mistakes we can make is assuming that resistance is proof we are moving in the wrong direction. In reality, resistance often accompanies progress. Consider how a tree develops. The stronger it grows, the more it must withstand wind, storms, and changing seasons. Those pressures do not necessarily indicate weakness. In many cases, they contribute to strength. The very forces that seem to threaten growth can become the forces that deepen it. Human character develops in much the same way. Few virtues emerge without opposition. Courage requires fear. Patience requires delay. Perseverance requires obstacles. Faith requires uncertainty. If life contained no challenges, many of the qualities we admire most would never have the opportunity to develop. This helps explain why discouragement can be so deceptive. It focuses exclusively on present discomfort, while ignoring future purpose. It magnifies obstacles and minimizes possibilities. It convinces us to judge the entire journey by a single difficult moment. But difficult moments are poor judges of ultimate outcomes. History is filled with examples of people who nearly abandoned their calling because progress seemed invisible. Had they stopped one step earlier, they would never have witnessed the fulfillment that eventually arrived. Their greatest mistake would not have been failure. It would have been surrendering before the process was complete. The challenge, of course, is that we rarely know how close we are. If we could see the full picture, perseverance would be much easier. If we knew with certainty that a breakthrough was only days away, most of us would endure the struggle without hesitation. The difficulty lies in moving forward when the outcome remains hidden. That is where faith becomes essential. Faith is not merely believing that good things will happen. It is continuing to trust God when immediate evidence seems scarce. It is refusing to let temporary circumstances determine eternal conclusions. It is choosing confidence in God's wisdom, even when our own understanding remains incomplete. There is also a profound psychological truth here. Human beings often interpret increased difficulty as a sign to retreat, yet growth frequently occurs at the edge of discomfort. Muscles strengthen through resistance. Knowledge expands through challenge. Character matures through testing. The instinct to withdraw can sometimes prevent us from reaching the very destination we seek. This does not mean every struggle should be endured indefinitely. Wisdom remains necessary. There are situations where God genuinely calls people to move, change direction, or begin a new chapter. But there is a significant difference between being led by God's guidance and being driven by discouragement. One arises from faith, the other arises from fear. Learning to distinguish between the two is one of the most important skills of spiritual maturity. When discouragement speaks, it often focuses on feelings. It says, "You are tired, therefore you should quit. You are frustrated, therefore nothing is working. You cannot see progress, therefore there is none." But feelings, while real, are not always reliable indicators of reality. They fluctuate from day to day. They reflect our perspective in the moment, not necessarily the truth of the situation. God invites us to build our lives on something more stable. He calls us to trust His promises even when emotions are unsettled. He reminds us that His work continues whether we can perceive it or not. He encourages us to remain faithful long enough to see what perseverance can produce. Perhaps the greatest tragedy is not failure itself, but abandoning the journey moments before. The lesson becomes clear, the door opens, or the blessing arrives. Many people never experience what God had prepared for them, because they mistake the pressure of the final stretch for proof that they should stop. So if you find yourself weary, do not immediately assume you are moving in the wrong direction. The resistance you feel may not be evidence that God has abandoned you. It may simply be evidence that your faith is being strengthened for what comes next. Because sometimes the darkest moment is not a sign that dawn will never come. It is proof that morning is closer than you think. One of the most surprising discoveries a person can make is that God's greatest blessings are not always the things He gives us. They are often the people we become through the process of seeking them. We tend to imagine blessing as something external, a new opportunity, a healed relationship, financial provision, a long-awaited answer to prayer, or a change in circumstances. These things can certainly be gifts from God. Yet if we look carefully at how God works throughout Scripture and throughout our own lives, we find a recurring pattern. Before He transforms a situation, He often transforms the individual living within it. This can be difficult to accept, because human beings naturally focus on outcomes. We want the door to open. We want the problem to disappear. We want the prayer answered exactly as we envisioned it. Our attention is fixed on what is ahead of us. God's attention, however, is often fixed on what is within us, and that difference changes everything. Imagine giving immense responsibility to someone who lacks wisdom. Imagine placing great influence in the hands of someone who has not learned humility. Imagine granting success to a person whose character is not prepared to sustain it. What appears to be a blessing could quickly become a burden. The gift itself might be good, but without the necessary maturity, it could produce consequences neither the person nor those around them are prepared to handle. God understands this better than we do. That is why His timing often includes preparation. While we focus on receiving, He focuses on shaping. While we ask for a destination, He works on the traveler. While we pray for change around us, He frequently begins by creating change within us. This process is rarely comfortable. Growth seldom is. Most meaningful transformation occurs when we are confronted with our limitations. We discover weaknesses we did not know we possessed. We encounter fears we have spent years avoiding. We realize that some of our assumptions, habits, and priorities require adjustment. These moments can feel unsettling because they challenge our self-image, yet they are often the very moments through which God performs his deepest work. There is a philosophical insight worth considering here. Many people spend their lives chasing circumstances they believe will make them fulfilled. They assume happiness lies just beyond the next achievement, the next possession, the next milestone. But once those goals are reached, they often discover that external success alone cannot satisfy the deeper longings of the human soul. Why? Because the soul was created for more than achievement. It was created for transformation and relationship with God. A person may gain everything they once desired and still feel empty if they have neglected the development of their inner life. Conversely, a person who has experienced genuine spiritual transformation can possess very little by worldly standards and yet possess remarkable peace, purpose, and contentment. This does not mean circumstances are irrelevant. Rather, it means they are not ultimate. The condition of the heart matters more than the condition of the environment. That truth runs against much of modern thinking. Society often teaches that fulfillment comes from acquiring more. God frequently teaches that fulfillment comes from becoming more, not more powerful, more famous, or more admired, but more faithful, more loving, more patient, more wise, and more aligned with his purposes. Notice how often the qualities we admire most in others emerge through difficulty. Compassion is often born from suffering. Patience develops through waiting. Humility grows through setbacks. Wisdom frequently arises from mistakes and lessons learned over time. These qualities cannot simply be purchased or inherited. They are forged through experience. In retrospect, many people realize that the greatest gift God gave them was not the answer they made, but the person they became while waiting for it. The season they once wished away became the season that taught them trust. The challenge they wanted removed became the challenge that deepened their faith. The obstacle they considered unfair became the very thing that prepared them for future opportunities. This perspective changes how we interpret our present struggles. Instead of asking only, "When will this situation change?" we begin asking, "What is God teaching me through this season?" Instead of measuring progress solely by external results, we start paying attention to internal growth. And often, that internal growth is the miracle before the miracle. The remarkable truth is that when God transforms a person, the effects extend far beyond a single moment. Circumstances may change temporarily, but transformed character influences every area of life. It shapes decisions, relationships, priorities, and responses to future challenges. It creates a foundation capable of supporting blessings that might otherwise have been unsustainable. So if you feel frustrated because things are not changing as quickly as you hoped, consider another possibility. Perhaps God is not withholding your blessing. Perhaps he is preparing you to receive it in a way that will produce lasting fruit. Because sometimes the greatest gift God gives is not a new place to stand, but a new person standing in that place.